more on that now. I'm joined by Enoch Rabotapi. He's the Chief Director for the National Institute of Curriculum and Professional Development, and he joins us virtually from Pretoria. Enoch, thank you so much for your time this evening. Now, that a report also based on a recent report with figures that showed that Western Cape schools recorded the most incidents of corporal punishment in the classroom, followed then by the Free State and Gauteng. As we get this conversation going, do you care to comment first on what perhaps is at the core of this regional difference?
Well, I think these reports, firstly, they demonstrate that the issue of corporal punishment is still very much prevalent within our schools. And it's also a reflection that teachers are still struggling with making a transition from violent forms of discipline, which were prevalent in the past, and they are struggling to adapt to the new ways of, corrective and progressive discipline. Now, there's a relationship between administering of corporal punishment and other incidents of violence. So our assumption, of course, is that areas that are experiencing higher incidents of crime in their communities, in those areas, that is likely to spill over to what is happening in the schools. And because of the challenges that teachers have in relation to how to manage the situation, so resorting to the use of corporal punishment in those areas is the likely reaction in an effort to try and deal with high incidents of indiscipline within the school.
Yeah, you make a very good point, and it's a point that's been made before, that, of course, our schools do not operate or practice in isolation, that they are often a microcosm of the society or the communities within which they find themselves, and it only makes sense that that would be prevalent in some way, shape or form. We also heard in that report from my colleague Aisha Ismail, the teachers speaking about the many pressures that they face, increasing pressures that they face. And now, according to that report, what, in your opinion, are you hearing are those pressures that teachers are facing that perhaps would lead to them lashing out in this form, even though they know it's illegal? It's been illegal for some time now already. So we've had a couple of generations of teachers who were brought up knowing that this is illegal. But what are you hearing from the teachers that is at the core of them resorting to this kind of practice?
Well, in our view, there are several factors that may be responsible for this. Firstly, it's a struggle with a mindset shift on behalf of the teachers. Remember that the majority of the teachers who are currently in our system are teachers who have been orientated in a particular approach. Most of them have been in the profession for quite some time. And during the time when they themselves were at school, the use of corporal punishment was prevalent. So that's what they have largely been socialized in. So now that they are required to approach issues of indiscipline differently, despite the various forms of support that is being provided to them, but it's clear that many teachers are still struggling to do the transition. Secondly, the issue of the many issues that teachers are struggling with. We are all acknowledging the fact that teachers are severely under pressure on a number of things. The COVID-19 pandemic has come with its own pressure on teachers, with they themselves suffering incidents of psychosocial support for both teachers and learners. So it's more of a knee-jerk reaction in terms of how they deal with some of these issues, because clearly trying to engage learners and trying to ensure that you engage the parents about the behavior of the learners, it's something that takes time and that requires patience. But because of the challenges that teachers themselves are facing, in many instances, the patience is not there to go through the process, and they end up resorting to some of these actions that end up putting them in trouble at the end.
According to the current curriculum for the training of teachers, how are they being guided in terms of how to deal with a difficult student? Often in high schools, we have much older students as well. It's the South African reality. And indeed, with children in a school where they find themselves in a hotspot spot or an at-risk community, are they being advised on various scenarios and how best to deal with it in a school environment?
Well, firstly, let's look at it from a legislative perspective. Firstly, you have the South African Schools Act that requires that a school must have a code of conduct for learners. And also the school governing body, as part of that code of conduct, must come up or must follow certain measures in instances where there are cases of ill discipline. Now, by adopting those measures, the department was attempting to remove pressure from the teachers so that the issue of learner discipline does not become a teacher problem. Of course, the teacher is the first point of contact when it comes to an issue of ill discipline. But then what the system is doing is to design a process that should support the teacher in terms of how that problem is resolved, so that it doesn't become a personal problem of a teacher. Now, over and above that, we have had guidelines that have been developed by the department where teachers were also workshopped in terms of how they need to follow this due process that has been determined. But our observation is that in many instances, these things happen during the heat of the moment. These things happened when in an emotionally charged atmosphere, and this leads teachers to sometimes react, in certain ways, in many instances out of provocation as well from the conduct of these learners. So it is not an easy thing to deal with. It's a matter that requires us to continue to educate and alert teachers also to the dangers of this practice, but also ensure that in instances where it happens, action is taken so that teachers can also see the seriousness of engaging in this unlawful practice. So we are continuing in partnership with our teacher unions, in partnership also with other departments like social development, to try and make sure that we address the psychosocial challenges that teachers face, but also ensure that we get the support of the parents and the communities in playing their part when it comes to learner discipline, but also ensuring that teachers clearly understand the procedures and protocols they must follow when they experience such incidents.
Okay, very interesting discussion there, and I'm sure one that we should continue to have, because it really is a very serious issue that affects so many households and so many communities and schools. Thank you so much for your time this evening. That's Enoch Rabotapi, Chief Director for the National Institute of Curriculum and Professional Development, joining us virtually there.